Today on Amazing Grace, your relationship with your parents. The second in a series of lessons for teenagers.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Hi, I'm Steve Flatt, and welcome to the Amazing Grace Bible class. On today's Amazing Grace Bible class, we've got the room filled with senior high students. This is the second week of a youth series where we're looking at the books of 1st and 2nd Timothy, trying to focus in on some of the great themes that Paul wrote to that young man. Today we're going to particularly look at the relationship that you guys have with your parents. We'll get into the lesson and we'll get into our singing in just a moment, but last week as we started the series, we took just a moment to kind of get to know who some of these young people are. Let's go over here. Stand up here. Stand up. Let's turn and face, how about camera number 2 right there? Tell everybody who you are.
I'm Danny Bryant. I go to Good Pasture Christian High School.
What year are you, Danny?
I'm a junior.
All right. Where you going to go into college after you get through?
Yes, sir.
You know where you're going to go?
Probably Lipscomb.
Probably
Maybe
Lipscomb.
Abilene.
Okay. Good deal. What do you think you're going to career major in? You have any idea?
Probably teach and coach.
All right. Great. Very good. Thank you, Danny. All right. Stand up right here. Same camera. Camera 2. Tell everybody who you are.
I'm Natalie Ship. I'm a junior at Hemfog.
All right, Natalie. What are your extracurricular interests? What hobbies do you have? Sports or anything? What do you do?
I play a little volleyball.
Okay. What are your future plans, college and so forth?
I plan to go to David Lipscomb and get a job after that.
Okay, good idea. That works out well. Thank you, Natalie. Appreciate that. Let's go over here. This lovely young lady in the blonde hair. We'll go ahead and stand up here and tell everybody who you are.
I'm Ashley Nichols, and I go to Good Pasture High School.
All right, Ashley, what year are you?
I'm a senior.
So you're about to graduate.
Yes.
Do you know where you're going to school, or are you going to school?
You teach Chattanooga,
Okay, what's your major going to be?
history and political science.
Okay, very good. Great. Thank you, Ashley. Appreciate that. These are not actors. These are live folks and wonderful, wonderful people, and we're glad that we can share this class time with them. Before we get into our lesson today, we're going to enjoy some singing of praise to God. Sing along right now, okay?
Father, I adore you, and I lay my life before you, and I love you. Jesus, I adore you, and I lay my life before you, and
Said a moment ago that our lesson today is going to focus in on your relationship with your parents. As about half of you were coming into our room here today, I gave you a sheet of paper and asked you to fill out the answers to 3 questions. The questions were on a 1 to 10 scale, how would you rate your relationship with your folks? Second question was, over what issues do you find yourself arguing with your parents? And the third question was, if you could change anything about the relationship you have with mom and dad, what would it be? Now, these are all anonymous. I don't know who filled out what. Let me just read 5 or 6 here to kind of get the theme of what some of the issues are and the friction points, all right? The first respondent, rate your relationship with your parents. They said a 6 on a 1 to 10 scale. What issues do we argue about? My independence and dating. I flipped through these. Those are not unique, okay? What would I change? The ability to communicate better, understanding each other. Pretty insightful responses. Here's the second one. 1 to 10 scale. This individual put, mine's a 7. The issues we argue over, relationships, attitude, and school. What would you change? They would take the time to see my point of view. That's interesting. Here's another one that says 7, a 1 to 10 scale. Issues that you argue over, independence, college, future plans. This person said the thing they would change about the relationship is, I wish they would have more faith in me. It's good. Another 7. 7 seems to be the popular number right now. 7. What are the issues that you argue over? Freedom, dating, and boys. Probably a girl filled this out, I think. I'm not sure. All right. What would you change? I would like more understanding and patience. Listen to this. On both sides. Pretty good. It's a mature response, isn't it? All right. One more. Rate the relationship with your parents a 6. Issues of argument. Who's right and who's wrong? That's usually an issue in argument, okay? I think I'm right and I think they're wrong. Okay, good. What would you change? My respect for them. I said that was like one more here. Quickly, 1 to 10, this one said a 4. 1 to 10's a 4. What do you argue over? Work, school, and money. What would you change? It's interesting. They said they focused toward themselves. I'd be more open. Now, in our lesson time in just a moment, I want to talk about what can you do? What can you do to make your home life all it can be? Now, I realize there are things your mom and dad ought to do. I want to talk about that a little bit in the lesson. But the point is, as God's fashioned each one of us, who has He given us control over? You've only got control over one person, and that's you. And I've only got control over me. And if I want the relationship with my folks to be better, where does that change begin? It begins with me. And we're going to talk about how in just a moment. First, let's sing another song of praise to the Lord.
Oh, come, let us adore Him. Oh, come, let us adore Him. Oh, come, let us adore Him. Christ the Lord, we give You all the glory. We give You all the glory. We give You all the glory. Christ the Lord, for You alone are worthy. For You alone are worthy. For You alone are worthy. Christ the Lord.
Your relationship with your parents. You know, from front to back, the Bible talks about how important that is. In the New Testament, for example, in Ephesians 6:4, Paul wrote, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Colossians 3:20, the same apostle said, "Children, obey your parents in everything." But you know what I think signifies the depth and the importance of the idea of the relationship with your mom and dad, to me goes all the way back to the 10 Commandments. Think about that for a moment. The 10 Commandments were the basis for the Mosaic Law, but they were more than that. They were eternal principles about treatment toward God and other human beings. And you know, think about that. God laid down for this whole nation of people and for all posterity to read the most basic things that He wanted. I mean, like the first one is, "You shall have no other gods before me." I mean, that's pretty basic, isn't it? Pretty foundational. God only gave 10. And the first one that He gave in terms of dealing with other human beings is, honor your father and your mother. He gave that before He said, don't steal. He gave it before He said, don't kill. He gave it before He said, don't lie. He said, when I start with human behavior, here's where it begins. I want you to honor your mom and dad. Give you an idea of just how important it is. Look at this passage from 2 Timothy. It's our text tonight. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2. In 2 Timothy 3:2, Paul is writing to the young man, and he's telling them what some of these people are going to become. He says, people will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive. Look at this. Disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, and unholy. Now, I don't know how that looks to you, but to me it looks like all of these are these terrible sins, and right in the middle of it is, and don't be disobedient to your parents. But what does that tell us by its context? That when Paul was writing this young man and said, hey, there are going to be some problems in this world, and there are going to be grave problems, right up there with the most severe is a broken relationship between children and parents. I want to propose to you that the relationship that you have with your parents is the most important relationship that you have in your life, except for the relationship that you have with your God. Did you hear that? The relationship that you have with your parents affects the relationship that you have with your friends. It affects the relationship you have at school. They've done studies and have found out that young people who have poor relationships with mom and dad do much more poorly in school. The relationship you have with your parents affects your future. And listen to this, most importantly, the relationship you have with your parents affects your relationship with God. I want you to look at this statement up on the screen here with me. I think this is so important. If you don't get along with your parents, you won't get along with God. I can count all the exceptions to that rule I found in a lifetime on one hand. Say that with me, would you, right now? Say it out loud. If you don't get along with your parents, you won't get along with God. You'll find that the people that you go to school with who are miserable continually, I dare say that 9 out of 10 of them have a terrible relationship for some reason at home. How do you have a positive relationship at home? How do you not fall into that category that Paul wrote to Timothy about being disobedient to parents? I want to share with you 4 key concepts. 4 key concepts that are so central. Follow along with me. Concept number 1 is the concept of authority. Now don't look at the definition yet, but authority. Boy, that's a dirty sounding word, isn't it? Like authority, you know. I mean, when we hear that, what do you do? I just want to kind of, name me some authority figures. Just from where you at. Name me an authority figure. Police, definitely. Another one. Teacher. Teacher's an authority figure. Principal. Parents, authority figures. Right. All right, we could go on. There are a lot. Judge, warden. I hope you don't ever know anything about that, okay? But those are authority figures. Look at the definition, and this is not from the dictionary, but I propose to you this is a biblical definition of authority. Look at this. God and others He puts in our lives who have the power to tell us what to do and the power to enforce it. That's an authority figure. Who is the chief authority figure? You see that? I mean, God. You don't get much more authority than that. So He's authority number 1, but then other authority figures are people that He puts in our lives that He gives the power to say, here's what you do, and then the power to enforce that. I want you to look at this next verse. It's Romans 13, verse 1. Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities. Look at this next part of the sentence. For there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Now, does that sink in? There is authority on this earth, and we started naming all these authority figures. Hear this. There is no authority figure that exists on the face of the earth that doesn't exist except by the hand and the delegation of God. You say, well, wait a minute, Steve, does that mean that everybody who's ever been an authority figure is a good authority figure? No, there were guys like Adolf Hitler, who were horrible authority figures. But understand this, whether it's a judge or a policeman or a teacher or a father or a mother or a warden or whatever, authority figures are there because it's the very design and delegation of God. And here's what this verse tells us. Authority is God's tool in our lives to make us what we need to be. I'm going to be honest with you about me. I wouldn't be the person that I need to be if I didn't have authority over me, and I do. I've got bosses. I've got people to whom I'm accountable. I've got ultimately God and Jesus Christ. And I'll tell you, I'm lazy enough and I'm carnal enough as a human being that if I didn't have authority in my life, I wouldn't be anywhere close to what I need to be. Authority is God's tool, and we all need authority figures. All right, that's the first concept. Let's go to the second concept. After authority, the second concept is pride, okay? Now, what is pride? Pride is the spirit that says, I don't need authority. Pride is the spirit that said, I am the authority. By the way, do you know where we suspect pride began? There are numerous scriptural hints, including Isaiah 14 and passages in the New Testament, that perhaps the origin of Satan occurred in heaven itself, even before the creation of the world, that Satan is maybe a fallen, created heavenly being, perhaps an angel, and that he was cast down because he said, I will ascend to the throne of God, and I will be God. You see, he wanted to have the utmost authority. And do you know what Satan's number one goal in the lives of every one of us is? Here's what he tries to do. He tries to get us to have this thing, pride, and say, I don't need any authority. I don't need it. That leads to the third concept. Let's go to the next one. Authority, pride. The third concept is rebellion. Rebellion is resisting and disobeying authority. You know what rebellion is? It's kind of pride is in here, it's in the heart. Rebellion takes it out to the hands. See, it starts up in here, in your inner being, but rebellion is when it becomes evident. Think about when Satan came to the Garden of Eden. You remember the story, Adam and Eve there? And of course, God basically gave Adam and Eve 2 rules. You know, he said, number 1, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And number 2, obey all rules. You know, that was all there was. That's all he had to do. Just remember that. And Satan comes down and he said, well, what did God tell you? And of course, Eve is already, she said, well, God told us not to eat of the tree or even touch it. He didn't say anything about touching it. He said, don't eat of it. And look what Satan says. Or we'll surely die. Satan said, oh, you won't die. You won't die. You know why God doesn't want you to eat that tree? Because he knows if you eat the tree, you'll be as smart as God. He just doesn't want you to be that smart. What happens to Eve? Pride. I don't want an authority figure. I don't want God to be my authority figure. And then what does Satan, in the form of the serpent, continue to coax her to do? To not just feel the pride, but to pick the fruit and then to eat it. And that's a thing called rebellion. And people, you and I cry, and you and I hurt, and you and I bleed, and you and I are going to die one day because of rebellion. It all happened because of that. Satan's number 1 goal is to get you to think you don't need authority. You know what his number 2 goal is? Is then to get you to act as if you don't need authority. But that leads to the 4th concept, and this is so important. Submission. Submission is when we willfully and joyfully obey and heed the instruction of authority. Now, I put 2 words in there on purpose, folks. Willfully and joyfully, not begrudgingly and forcefully, but willfully and joyfully. One of my favorite characters in the Bible is King David. Don't you love David? You remember who was his predecessor as king? Saul, right? And remember, he was the first king Israel had, and God says, you don't need a king. And the people said, oh, we want a king, God, we want a king. And God says, okay, I'll give you a king, but you're going to wish you didn't have a king. And so he appoints Saul. Now, what happened to Saul? You know what happened to Saul? He fell guilty to pride and rebellion. God said, here's what I want you to do with the Amalekites. Saul didn't do what God said do. And then instead of repenting and turning to God, Saul went off to a witch and started hunting the occult. He was looking for spiritual mediums, and he was going into the realm of really demonology, you see. He was going the wrong way. And so God says, all right, Saul, that's it. Pride and rebellion, you're not my man. And so he sends the prophet Samuel to find a young boy by the name of David. David was probably as young as most of you. Maybe he was probably junior high. And God had him anointed king. But even though he was anointed king, it wasn't time for him to become king. And you know what happened to David? He shows up one day and kills Goliath. Then he becomes a great warrior, and the women sing, Saul has killed his thousands, but David's killed his 10,000s. And so finally, David gets bigger and bigger in the people's eyes, and Saul gets so jealous, he determines to kill him. And there is this great scene in 2 Samuel 24. David's been on the run now for months. Listen to this. I want to read to you beginning at verse 3. He came to the sheep pens, this is David, along the way. That's Saul. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. He went in to use the bathroom. Okay? Isn't the Bible wonderful? It tells it just like it is. It pulls no punches. Saul goes into the cave to do that. David and his men were far back in the cave. In other words, David and his guys were back there. Saul goes in there to use the bathroom. Listen to this. The men, David's men said, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. That's how close he got to him with a spear and a sword. He literally didn't even know it, cut off his robe. Listen to the next verse. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lift up my hand against him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. With these words, David rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. A little bit later, Saul's outside, and David's up on the mountain precipice, and he yells to Saul and shows him how close he was, what he cut off. And listen to what David said to him when he shouted to him from a distance. This day you have seen with your eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lift my hand against my master, because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. Now understand and recognize that I am not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. Isn't that beautiful? Do you see? The man was being hunted like a common criminal, and he could have killed him. But he said, wait a minute, wait a minute. Saul is God's anointed. I won't lift my hand against him. People, that's submission. Now, did he not kill him because Saul was such a great king? Hardly. Saul was a wretch of a king. He was chasing an innocent man out of pure blind jealousy. But David said it doesn't make any difference. He's God's anointed. Now, young people, here's the reason I read all that. I want you to see the point. Your parents are your anointed in your life. You're not here by accident. Years ago, God gave in your mother's womb the gift of life, and you're it. And you're not an accident. You're here because God anointed your parents as the authority figures in your life. And the question that you've got to decide, and it's a critical time right now, is will I be guilty of rebellion? A moment ago I read from Romans 13, I read verse 1 where it says no authority exists except what God established. Can I read to you verse 2? Listen. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. Do you see why I said a moment ago, and I had you repeat, if you don't have a good relationship with your parents, you won't have a good relationship with God. You know why? It's pretty much impossible. For he is the authority, or rather the parents are the authority that God's established in your life. Now, I think back to some of the things you filled out on the sheets. You know, sometimes your parents don't understand you, do they? I mean, I know. I'm not that old. I can remember. I thought my mom, I thought my dad's name was really Shem. I thought he got off the ark with Noah, I mean, I was sure he was at least that old, because he didn't. I thought my dad didn't have a belly button. I assumed he's always been alive. He never was born because he never had been a teenager, Maybe just like Adam, God just made him one day, and he's always there because I thought he was so old-fashioned and I thought he didn't understand. But you know what? I'm pushing 40. This is the year I turned 40. I've just told that on television. I can't believe I did that, okay? And you know what? I'm now old enough, almost old. Well, if I started early, I was old enough to be your parent, And all of a sudden, you know what I find myself doing? I find myself telling my children the very thing that I just couldn't stand my old man telling me. You know what it reminds me of? How many of you have seen the movie Karate Kid? Remember the first, did any of you see that? You're probably so young you had to see it on video. Do you remember nod if you saw Karate Kid. I want to explain something to you that I thought was so neat on Karate Kid. Do you remember the scene where the kid who's getting picked on, the Karate Kid, goes to the old master and he wants to learn karate? You remember that? You remember what the old man has him do? First he takes him out to the fence and he gives him that bucket of paint and he said, paint up, paint down, and paint up, and paint down. And the boy, hey, remember? The boy took the paint, he started doing this. He started going, shh, 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 shh. He said, no. He took his hand, he said, what? Go down. And so the kid did it for hours, both hands. That right hand got tired, started doing it, And he comes in, he's all worn out, and he says, now will you teach me karate? Now will you teach me karate? He says, first, one other chore. We go wax the car. You remember that? Remember that scene? And I love it. This is my favorite scene in the whole movie. He got the boy out to the car and he goes, wax on, wax off. You remember that? You remember the scene? And the boy started doing this. He started driving the car. And he goes, no, wax on, wax off. He said, no. And so sure enough, he goes, and so you see the boy, after going, wax on, wax off. And so that goes on for hours. And he finishes one car and he makes him do like 3 others. And the kid comes in, and by this time it's pitch black, it's late, and he's fed up. He said, that's it. I don't do it anymore. That's all. I'm tired of this. You're not going to teach me karate. I'm going to go back and I'm going to go home and just forget it. And he started to walk out, and the old master, you remember? He looked at him and he said, come here. And all of a sudden he goes, huh! And the boy goes. And he threw the left hand, and he went, choo. And the man goes, wax on, wax off. You know something? I've never forgotten that. I'm going to tell you something, folks. that principle is exactly what your mamas and daddies are doing for you. They're letting you wax on and wax off. And just like that guy, I'm telling you, you don't really see it. And sometimes parents aren't real good. Hey, you know another thing? We all got weaknesses. I'm not real good explaining sometimes to my children. Sometimes I just get a short temper. Sometimes I just get impatient. I don't explain it. But what we're trying to do is teach them the principles so that when the bolts of life come, you're ready to wax on and wax off. Now, I realize that some of you have parents who may not be a Christian, and you are, by your very life, setting an example for them. Let me tell you one key point. Your parents' weaknesses do not justify your rebellion. You hear me? Always be what God wants you to be. I want us to bow and have a word of prayer, then we're going to sing another song before we close. Would you bow with me, please? Great God, we love and adore you. And today we ask particularly that you help us in relationships with all people, but particularly the relationships that we have with our parents. Father, the young men and the women in this room, you've gifted them to be able to do great things for you. But we know, Father, that they will not rise above the faith that they have in you, nor above the relationship that they're able to have with the authority figures in their life. Father, help us to be submissive, joyfully, willingly. Help us not to fall victim to what Satan wants most of all for us, and that being pride and rebellion. I pray that, Father, for me as well as for all of these young people and for all the people viewing. Bless us now as we leave here. In Jesus' name, amen.
Love of the Lord never ceases, His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in Him. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in Him. Therefore I will hope in Him.
Real quickly before we leave you today, we'd like to send each of you, particularly the young people in our audience, a copy of the latest Teenage Christian, wonderful magazine that will help build the Christian faith in young hearts and minds everywhere. Just call the number that's on your screen or write to the address. We'll get one of those in the mail to you right away. We're going to continue our series with these wonderful young people and hopefully with you and any young people you can invite to watch next week. And I look forward to seeing you then.
If you would like a free transcript of today's lesson, write us at Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace is brought to you by Churches of Christ. Visit one in your community.